Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to Keeping Fish Simple. So in today's video, we are going to be talking all about shrimp. And in specific, we're going to be talking about how I produced over 1,000 of these beautiful yellow cherry shrimp within a year. All the information that you hear today will be applicable to the red and blue dream shrimp. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video to learn all of the things that I learned in the past year of keeping and breeding these beautiful shrimp. And without any further ado, let's get started. Now, about a year ago, I picked up this colony of yellow cherry shrimp, and I think I started off with about 10 or 20 of them. As you can see, this colony has exploded into over 1,000 different shrimp. I do have some of these shrimp available on my website down below if you guys want to go check that out. I have so many of these guys, it's not funny, and I've learnt so many different things about this beautiful species that I want to share today. What I'm going to be doing is giving you guys a rundown of all the things that went wrong for me at the start, because at the start when I did get these shrimp, I did run into a few issues with die-offs, and I want to explain everything that I did to overcome these issues and give you guys some pieces of advice to make this really easy. I reckon in the past year, I've probably spent a maximum of about 3 hours on this tank. I'm not even lying. The only time I've really spent on this tank is topping up the water, feeding the shrimp, and catching them out when I'm selling them. So without any further ado, let's get into the first thing that I've learned. Now, when I first thought of getting these guys, I was really inspired by other people's videos on YouTube, seeing thousands of different shrimp in a tank, and I really wanted to replicate this. What I thought a lot of those breeders were doing was providing these tanks with a lot of attention, as I've been doing with other species in my fish room. But I quickly came to learn that this was the actual opposite of what I needed to do. The first thing that I've learned is to do minimal water changes. Like I said, the only thing that I do with this tank nowadays is top up water that's been evaporated. Cherry shrimp really love having stable water, and the best way to have stable water is to not do water changes. I think in the past year I might have done 1 or 2 water changes, and I just kind of gave up after that, and I stopped doing them because every time I do a water change, I'd see 1 or 2 of these guys die off due to that stress. All you want to do with these guys is set and forget, and because I have a large clump of Java moss in my tank, this really helps to keep this place like an ecosystem and keep the tank really stable. So if you feel like you want to do water changes, I'd recommend doing 10% once a month, but other than that, I've not seen any need to do any water changes in the tank, and I haven't run into any issues since. Now, the second thing that I've learned with these guys is pretty obvious, and I'm going to just make this a quick point, but it's to make sure you actually have males and females. When I picked them up, I did have a die-off, and this is because I did a few things wrong, so we'll talk about that a bit later, but in the end, I didn't think I had males and females, and I actually had to go and re-buy some cherry shrimp to make sure I did have males and females. These guys are a little bit harder to sex, the yellow ones. They are a bit easier to sex once they're older, but you can easily end up with all males or all females, and then you're not going to have any breeding. So make sure you get males and females. I'd recommend starting off with a colony of about 20. This will definitely make sure you have a mix, and you'll be sweet from there. Now, why did I have that initial die-off? Well, at the start, I added a shrimp substrate to this tank. I completely forgot about the water parameters that the shrimp needed, and I thought that a shrimp substrate would really help these guys. As it turns out, a shrimp substrate is designed to soften water, and what these cherry shrimp need is relatively hard water. Not African cichlid water, but just your community tank water that has a little bit of GH and KH in it. What this substrate did was suck out all the GH and KH in the water and left the shrimps with no mineral. What this caused is lots of issues with my shrimps molting, and after this resulted in some shrimp dying. So this brings me to my third thing, and what I'm going to recommend doing is adding coral to your tank. So if you want to make like 1,000 shrimp like I did, my ideal shrimp tank would just be using tap water, and that's just with a tap water that most people will have with a little bit of GH and KH in it. I would do bare bottom, and I'll just add some Java moss to that tank and your shrimp. For filtration, I'd just use a sponge filter. I don't really recommend adding a substrate because this can impact the water sometimes, and depending on what kind of substrate you have, it will impact the water in some way. So to make things easy, especially for breeding, I just don't bother adding a substrate. It makes it a lot easier to catch the shrimp out, and there's a lot of benefits to it, but I'd always recommend adding some coral to your tank. So you can buy crushed coral from heaps of aquarium shops. Luckily in Australia there's some on the beach, so I just take a few pieces and I just add 1 or 2 pieces to the water, because what this does is over time just adds a little bit of calcium to the water to help the shrimps with their molting. Before I did this, I was having lots of shrimp die from molting issues and just the die off at the start as well, and ever since I added this crushed coral, I haven't had any problems with molting, and it's helped all of my shrimp tanks. My blue dreams have been heaps better, even my crystal reds have been better. So I've added just coral to every single tank. I don't know whether they eat it or if it just over time kind of wears into the tank's water, But I think this is a reason why I haven't had to do any water changes, is because this little piece of coral is really helping the shrimp to get their KH in the water and has made it not really necessary to change water in the tank. Now my fourth thing that I've learned this last year kind of relates to the last thing I was talking about with the water parameters, and this is acclimating your shrimp when you get them. I've talked about this in videos before, but acclimating shrimp is so important because they're very sensitive to changes in water parameters, and your water is not going to be similar to the person's water that you bought them from. So it's very important that when you get new shrimp, you acclimate them over a series of probably 1 or 2 hours with a drip acclimation system. I'm not going to talk about that in today's video, but it's very easy to set up, and I'll just do a very long and slow acclimation so the shrimp don't realize they've gone from point A to B. This is just so important. Make sure you acclimate your shrimp before you get them, and that way you will never experience that die-off like I did. And the fifth thing that I've learned in the last year is going to help save you money, but also make your job really easy with breeding these guys, and this is going to be to add small amounts of leaf litter. When I talk about small amounts, I just talk about leaf litter as a food, because these guys absolutely love eating leaves. The reason I like adding leaves is because in case I forget to feed them, they'll just eat that leaf and you don't really have to worry too much about feeding them, and it provides a really great food source for babies. I only add a little bit because I don't want it to impact the water too much, because if you add a ton of leaves, it's going to release a bunch of tannins and it's going to mess up the water's pH and the KH and the GH, which we don't want. All we want that leaf litter in there doing is providing a food source. I've used a bunch of different leaves over the last year, including eucalyptus leaves and random leaves I found in my garden and banana leaves. The best leaf I've found so far is the Indian almond leaves, which you can get online on eBay for like a couple of bucks. You can get like 10 of them and they're going to last you ages. What I normally do is add like half a leaf and the shrimp will break it down over a week, and then I just keep topping it up, and this just provides a constant food source for these guys and really helps with rearing up the babies. Because what you'll see happen is in your shrimp tank, once you have heaps of shrimp start building up, they're going to attack the food and the babies aren't going to be able to get in there to have a bite. So all the big shrimp are going to get all the food and all the babies don't get food. So adding these leaves helps a lot, and it's helped me to breed thousands of shrimp over the last year. Tip number 6 is also going to tie into the last tip, and this is to add Java moss. Java moss is a great plant for shrimp breeding. There's tons of other plants you can add, but Java moss is one of my favorites, and this is because it's going to form this big clump of ball of moss. It looks amazing in my opinion, but it provides tons of surface area for these guys to grab onto, and also surface area for biofilms to form, which they can eat as well. So it's also a good food source. They're not going to actually eat the Java moss, but they'll pick off all the little things that are on it. And it also really helps to keep the water clean because it is a live plant, so it's going to use up a lot of nitrates to grow, and it's going to help keep that nitrate cycle running. And it's just a really good beneficial plant to add to your tank. It helps with filtration. It's really like having a clownfish and an anemone together. Having a cherry shrimp and Java moss together is like the exact same. It's a really good relationship that works so well with shrimp. And the last piece of advice that I've learned in the last year is to check for planaria. Planaria are a parasite that kind of gets into your tank. They're not really a parasite, but they do rock up in a lot of people's shrimp aquariums. And what can happen is they can actually end up infecting your shrimp, climbing in them and eating the shrimp. It's not that common. It's not going to decimate a population of shrimp, but it is an annoying thing that you don't want in your shrimp tank because firstly it's ugly, it kills shrimp, and it's really not something that you want in there. So always check your tank for planaria. What I'd recommend doing is when you first get your shrimp, maybe a week after they've been in the tank and they've kind of settled in, buy a product called No Planaria. It is about $60, but you're only going to need to buy one packet of it your whole life. I would just treat the aquarium no matter what was in there, just to make sure there's no planaria in there. And then from there on, I would just be doing constant checks to make sure there's no planaria forming or anything like that. But make sure there's no planaria in the tank. They're just really annoying, and I've had to do a couple of cycles of it because I have so many fish in my fish room. I hate having planaria in any of my tanks, and I would highly recommend that you hate them as well. So thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you found it informative. I hope you learned something. I've learned so much about these guys over just a single year, and I can't wait to see what I learn over the next year. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.